junction 4 of the A1M, which is not going to have any showstopper on the whole scenario, because I think already as of today, if you see in 2016, it's already overcapacity. So having this many more houses, it's going to make it worse. So I don't know how they're going to produce the transport model, especially for the junction 4 of A1M. And obviously, I haven't seen any sort of mitigation measures, what they're going to be approved, how they're going to widen the green lanes and the Cooper's Green Lane in order to allow the Hat 1 and Hat 15. So looking at this criteria, I don't think so I will be supporting this many houses on green belt. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tony?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Just a few quick questions and a comment. I very much support Councillor Markovic's comment about the infrastructure, the B197 and the area around the clock roundabout, which is often jammed up, and developments around there will cause more problems. I did have specific questions on Well 11 in Welling, if I may. In terms of it looks a very small site for the indicated number of dwellings. I just wonder how the density compares with the developments around it, and whether it's out of keeping, because obviously there have been other issues at the other end of the village with another development. And secondly, in terms of the access, I was a bit confused by the papers as to whether it's likely to be onto the Codicott Road or via Carlton Rise. And I believe an exit onto Codicott Road would be a better way of doing the development.
Thank you. Sorry?
Thank you.
Do you want to answer that? Yes, okay.
I can quickly answer your question, as Councillor Kingsbury. The density has been managed down, so it's only 25 dwellings per hectare, so it's actually quite low from its starting point. And the access would be onto the Codicott Road, it wouldn't be via Carlton Rise. That was an option at one point, but that's no longer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Fellow councillors, members of the public, good evening. 3 years ago, when all these sites were brought up, the Villages Ward, which is my ward, we had around 4,000 dwellings that were all going to be placed on us in the green belt and on the brownfield sites that existed there. We have had a lot of building on our Villages Ward, as anybody in Hatfield knows. And the factories and businesses that are being put there need a workforce to sustain them. Unfortunately, we haven't got enough houses in Hatfield, and we have to build them. We don't like building on green belt, as the rest of the other councillors will agree. But what Councillor Bell has said, I have to echo what he said. If we can reduce building on the green belt, he'd be very grateful. But unfortunately, we're fixed to this fait accompli. And unfortunately, I think we've got to go ahead with it. And that's basically all I've got to say. Since Ellenbrook was absorbed into our Villages Ward in May, the two of the sites that were destined for there have been scrapped. And I hope that Hatfield 2 will also be totally scrapped, not just put on a back burner. And we can do the best we can with Hat 1 and Hat 15. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, may I now, could I just see one green plan, please? Fox's Lane is an expanded traveller's site at the moment, and it's proposed that it would be properly expanded instead of illegally expanded. If it is properly expanded to the numbers we talked about, how can we be sure it's not illegally expanded to double the size? Because this seems to be what is happening to the travellers' sites.
And
They are
the
expanding.
same applies to Four Oaks in Welling.
That's true.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we haven't pursued enforcement action against Four Oaks and Fox's Lane, although we have investigated in both circumstances, is because We have previously identified them and we were aware we were contemplating them as part of this process, and enforcement at this point would wrap us up in this process and we didn't know what the outcome would be. We now have planning applications for both those sites, which we will have to consider in due course, and we have this decision before councillors today. Once the local plan has made a decision, and if any planning application goes through for those sites, there will be a clear future for those sites. And as I said before, once the plan is adopted, you make planning decisions in accordance with it, so therefore you can enforce against things that aren't in accordance with it and have taken place beyond there. So we have a challenge with enforcement at the moment, but in a future scenario where they're selected with a number, anything that exceeds that, given the plan is brand new and we will hopefully be meeting our need for traveller pitches over the planned period, we won't find ourselves in a scenario where we can be accused of not providing, and hence we have a very strong enforcement position to move forward on.
Okay, thank you for that. And I hope, therefore, we can and shall enforce in the future when we have sufficient pitches. May I now see the Little Heath site, please? Now, we've talked about the numbers taking Hatfield and Wenham City taking big numbers. This is a big number for Little Heath. Little Heath is a tiny development, just actually attached to Potters Bar. In fact, part of it sort of goes into Potters Bar. Two sides of the A1000. That site, the green site, the large green site, 100 houses, that is a big development for Little Heath, and the smaller site on the other side of the road. Proportionally, I think in the papers, it is one of the two that actually meets its proportionality. So it's a very, very large site then, which I'm not all that happy with. The whole plan itself clearly makes a lot of us unhappy, councillors as well as residents. I take what Malcolm says about the northern town somewhere, but frankly, that's not going to be lived in the timescale that we have. And if we try and rely on that, we're going to get enforced with the inspectors. I'm concerned about doctors and hospitals. For those of us in the south of the borough, the travel to the Lister Hospital is not quick by any means, and to be taken there in an ambulance, I assume it takes you about half an hour, and probably in the rush hour worse than that. I don't think we've quite got the doctors' surgeries and the hospitals sorted out. The hospitals aren't in the gift of this council anyway. I think we will need a lot of work on the infrastructure generally, and from what we've talked about tonight about the roads, the county won't do anything about roads unless 10 people are killed a week. So we need to be quite satisfied that the infrastructure will be secure, will be satisfactory, will be enough for us in roads, in water, in sewage and drainage, everything else to do with infrastructure. So there's work on that, but that will be done on the sites as they come forward and as they actually come into planning. It is not easy. We've heard about Panshanger tonight, and it sounds like there's a bit more to do on that as well, certainly a bit to and fro on that. We're not going to please everybody tonight. I know we've got some developers here who are listening to what we're talking about when it comes to their plots of land they want to develop, and they have their own interests as well. But councillors have a difficult decision. We've been working on this for a number of years. The officers have worked for a number of years. Very difficult amount of work they've done. They've been lobbied left, right and centre, both by the members of the public and by councillors up to now. It is not easy, and every councillor has his or her own ward to deal with, and has been equally lobbied by members of the public and indeed by developers. So it's not easy. Difficult decision to make.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can I have a mic, somebody, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. If I first of all can pick up on some of the issues that have been raised tonight. the issue of proportionality, would never ever have been a perfect science. But the one thing I will say, it is a lot better than it was when we looked at this last time. But we can only include sites that come forward from developers and landowners, and that's before the sites are assessed. So it is a really difficult job to get proportionality. I would like to just make one further comment about the Gypsy and Traveller site at Four Oaks. I've been on that site many times on my own. I never ever feel threatened at all by it. And in recent times when I've been on it, there have actually only been half the number of caravans and trailers on it that they have actual permission for. So I think, you know, I accept that there are times when they are way over, but it isn't always the case. And lastly, as a question to pick up, we are not the Highways Authority or the Transport Authority. The County Council and obviously Highways England are, and the County Council does have, or is in the middle of preparing a transport vision to 2050. And I am assured at every time I go to a meeting that that will address public transport. We can only hope that it does, but that's what I'm assured, and that's what we have to go by. Sorry, and one last thing. Malcolm, I regularly at Hertfordshire Infrastructure Planning Panel meetings talk about a garden city or some development somewhere else. Even if it was agreed tonight by somebody, it wouldn't happen in this plan period. And there is a question as to how many of our numbers, rather than the numbers in the district that it would be built in, would be accommodated. So if I can then go to what I was always going to say, the council has a responsibility to prepare a local plan so that planning decisions about the future of our borough and where development will occur is not taken out of our hands. Officers have done an enormous amount of work to ensure that sites have been properly assessed and the infrastructure issues associated with each site are understood, as has been explained to us by Colin and officers. However, I cannot stress enough that we need to take into account the views of residents, while still having regard to the number of houses and the amount of employment land that has been objectively assessed as being needed. Also, developers and landowners need to be sure that this process has been carried out in a transparent way in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework and Guidelines. As Colin already commented, and I would also draw your attention to the risk management implications on pages 18 and 19 of the report, in particular the need to have prepared a local plan by early 2017. So I would then like to make some comments on the various sites, and we'll deal with them from north to south. You have heard that schools provision has a major impact on these sites, and I agree with Glyn. I don't think any of us would ever disagree with him over this, but unfortunately it is out of our hands, and again we have to be guided by the experts at the County Council. I also find it ludicrous that we may well be building schools on sites that we lost schools previously. I think, however, that we should support the idea of a criteria-based policy for the selection of an additional secondary school site to serve growth in the Welwyn Garden City and northern villages. This is a pragmatic way of progressing the plan rather than pausing the process and waiting for a suitable site to be identified, as the government has threatened to intervene if we do not submit our local plan by early 2017. Panshanger. As far back as 1993, Panshanger Aerodrome was identified by an inspector as safeguarded for future potential growth needs, and it was released from the green belt for this purpose. Business cases from third parties have not been conclusive in demonstrating that rent and capital investment could be paid back within a reasonable number of years. I have severe reservations about delaying the local plan to investigate the very late proposal by Mr Fitch, when that proposal relies on a number of landowners being willing to redevelop their land. The final call for sites closed in mid-August last year, and as has been said, officers have worked hard since then to get where we are today. Indeed, the council has previously decided that it does not want Panshanger Golf Course to be redeveloped for housing, as it is a well-used community facility. The need for housing and the importance of preparing a sound local plan outweighs the desire of some residents to see the airfield retained. I also know that many people living in Digswell are pleased that planes no longer fly over their community. Hatfield, Hat 2, west of Hatfield. Officers advise that Hat 2 is considered suitable for development, but only beyond the planned period. Hertfordshire County Council, as the mineral authority, has received a planning application for the extraction of minerals along St Albans Road West, and it could take up to 30 years before the land can be fully remediated. The development of Hat 2 would result in a loss of country park land that was master planned as part of Hatfield Business Park. It would not be right to take this valuable asset away from local residents until new park provision has been made. Because we cannot be certain how long it will take for minerals to be extracted and the land to be remediated as a country park, I recommend that Hat 2 should not be considered suitable at this stage, not even beyond the planned period. My view is further compounded by Hertfordshire County Council's advice that the cumulative selection of Hat 1, Hat 2 and Hat 15 would make local congestion worse, even with mitigation, such that one site might be rejected at this stage to provide more time to consider the transport constraints and improvement options. Hat 5 and Hat 19. Officers advise that Hat 5 and Hat 19 could be considered to help achieve the objective assessment of need, but they would impact on greenbelt purposes and narrow the gap between Hatfield and Smallford in St Albans. Turning to Hatfield, Hat 11 in Southway. I note officers' advice that Hat 11 is in a fragile gap between Hatfield and Welham Green, but I think that it should be reconsidered as suitable for housing. The gap between Hatfield and Welham Green is already partly compromised by existing employment development along Travellers Lane and by the presence of the new Barnfield site. My understanding of the NPPF is that New Barnfield is a brownfield site that could be suitable for redevelopment, even if it is not allocated for a particular use or activity, and would then be considered as windfall. The promoters of Hat 11 have identified scope to expand the lawn cemetery on Southway. The borough needs to find new land for this purpose, so the opportunity for extra cemetery space is a strategic advantage that should be given more weight. I therefore recommend that Hat 11 should be added to the list of suitable sites for 120 dwellings, with an assumption that its master planning includes a strong landscape belt to separate it from Welham Green. Turning then to Welham Green, I agree with the officer opinion that the level of growth in Welham Green should be limited to match the capacity of the existing primary school. The level of growth which would be needed to justify a new primary school would be far greater than the proportionate amount for Welham Green, and would put enormous stress on its road network and other community facilities. Brookman's Park. The level of growth in Brookman's Park should be limited to match the capacity of the existing primary school to expand by half a form of entry, as this is Hertfordshire County Council's preference as education authority, and this has been well articulated in the report. However, I disagree with the weighing up exercise, and I think that BRP 12 would reduce the gap between Brookman's Park and Welham Green. Residents made it very clear in their consultation responses that they do not wish to see settlements merge, and I would also have concerns about traffic volume along Bradmore Way if BRP 12 were to accommodate 110 dwellings and a two form of entry primary school. So I'm glad to see this is not in the proposal. In Cuffley, there is no question that Cuff 4 and Cuff 5 would represent a significantly disproportionate increase to the size of Cuffley. That would put a great deal of stress on road network and community facilities. In summary, I'm disappointed that we have not been able to identify enough suitable sites for housing to meet the objective assessment of need, as there is a risk that the local plan will not be found sound, or the inspector will ask us to consider the inclusion of additional sites. However, as elected councillors, we have a responsibility to listen to the views of residents who have repeatedly told us that they are concerned about too much development taking place on Greenbelt land, about the merging of distinct settlements and the loss of identity as a consequence, and concerns about the pressure of growth on the road network and vital community facilities such as schools and GP surgeries. The fact that we have identified sites for some 12,000 new homes should be congratulated, but this will be a 26% increase on the current housing stock over the next 15 years. It is also important to note, and I say this with a heavy heart, that the selection and release of Greenbelt sites for about 5,400 new homes, although something we would not choose to do, equates to a loss of only 4% of the Greenbelt land in the borough. Even with these tough decisions, over 75% of the borough will continue to be designated as Greenbelt land, where development will only be able to take place in very special circumstances. I too would like to thank officers for their work over many months in getting to this stage in the process. However, it is now time for members to start to take ownership of the plan and promote it to residents, landowners and other interested parties. I therefore recommend that we accept the sites proposed by officers with the addition of Hat 11 and the deletion of any reference to Hat 2. I further recommend that officers now draft the proposed submission local plan on the basis of these sites.
Thank you. I'll take that vote just a second, but Glyn, you wanted to say one thing.
Yeah, please. Just to come back then, Councillor Perkins mentions that mineral extraction is as one of the reasons that had to not be included, as we're not going to realise when that's going to be finished and completed. Can we confirm that there is not any mineral extraction considered then for the Pansanger airfield site? And if there is, when are we going to place weight on that being finished? Because that's something that needs to be considered.
What the County Council have said to us is where we are looking at mainly strategic sites, they don't want to see any mineral opportunities sterilised as a consequence of those sites coming forward. And they've done work and they've encouraged all the developers to look and see what capacity there is. The presumption is any mineral extraction on strategic sites would be limited so that that mineral could be used to build the houses that came forward on those sites. What we understand with the Pansanger site is it's not big enough to warrant any major mineral extraction, so any small-scale amounts that might exist would be used to construct houses on that site. So it wouldn't be a major minerals working. If any minerals are deemed to be present, it would be limited to whatever was necessary to help build some of those houses.
Okay, then, so for
But
that
what
in
we are
simple
not
terms,
talking,
that's a
sorry,
yes.
what we're not talking about compared to the Hatfield Road Rest site is a county-wide strategic mineral working.
Okay, fine. So for the benefit of everybody else, then, it is a yes that there will be mineral extraction considered at the Pansanger airfield site, albeit in a limited capacity.
Will be considered. We don't know the answer yet.
Sorry, but it has been our understanding that it would not involve taking minerals off the site and actually could stop additional lorry movements coming onto the site with minerals coming from elsewhere.
Totally understand that. However, if we any works to that conclusion, all it does is negates the fact that we can't build houses there until something is done, because you're taking up more and more space you take up, the less you can do. And no matter how you look at it, you only have X amount of space to play with. If we start digging that area, albeit to start putting stuff up there, we still have to do something back to that area and let it settle before we can do anything there. So if we're excluding Hat 2, in reality, we should really exclude Pantang Airfield as well.
Right. We have had a proposal from Mandy that the plan goes forward. It'll go out again to consultation. And I understand that'll be from the end of August until the end of October, about 8 weeks. Those in favour of that, please show now. And those against?
4 against.
Okay, that'll go forward. Thank you, and that's it for tonight. Thank you everyone. Just to let the members of the public know, we will not need to reconvene on Wednesday.